What's up, gamers? Welcome back to 180 MTG. My name is Ryan Overturf, and today I'm going to be talking about maintaining Singleton in cube design. But first, a quick update on what's going on in Minneapolis. I just got back from Portland a couple days ago. It was a really disorienting weekend to be out of town. Last Friday, there was a massive demonstration in Minnesota. There was a general strike, and tens of thousands of my neighbors marched to the streets of Minneapolis calling for an end to DHS's unlawful and violent occupation of our state. It was in negative 10-degree weather, really inspiring stuff to see so many people come out. And then tragedy Saturday morning as a squad of Border Patrol thugs executed Alex Preddy in the streets of Minneapolis. Words really fail to capture the range of emotions that I feel thinking about this and just taking in everything that's going on. I do continue to be heartened by the way that people are turning out to support each other and how Minnesotans are looking out for our neighbors and how this is getting national attention. And there was a lot of public outcry in reaction to really everything that's happening. And you're starting to see at least some acknowledgement of wrongdoing on the hands of the administration, but really just symbolic changes at this point in time. Like, yeah, Greg Bovino's out of here, but it's not like Tom Homan's really any better, just two sides of a coin there. And it's really upsetting to see Tim Waltz give Homan the benefit of the doubt as if it was ever earned, as if there was ever any justification for these thugs to be out on our streets, abducting people, kidnapping children, murdering people. There's just no good happening with any of that. It just has to end, and there's no good motivation here. There's no positive action being taken. They're not hunting the worst of the worst. They are literally just enacting violence on the American people. You are starting to see the national dialogue change with all the demonstrations and all of the pressure that are being put on American politicians. And it's really important right now to keep that pressure up, to be calling our representatives, making sure that they're not giving another dime to DHS. And that's the moderate position. ICE just needs to be abolished. I don't think the political power is there yet, but it doesn't mean we can't talk as if it is. We need to keep on moving in that direction. And that means keeping the pressure up when the administration is on the defensive. So keep calling your reps, keep donating to mutual aid. I do see that Good Luck High Five has extended their fundraiser for Minnesota-based mutual aid through the 15th. So I will have a link for that in the show notes here, as well as a longer list of mutual aid and areas that could use support. That's going to be things like legal assistance for people who are being unfairly, unlawfully targeted by DHS and need legal representation. This is important for keeping families together as they are cruelly split apart by DHS. It's going to be things like delivering food to people who are hard up for whatever reason, especially those who are afraid to leave their homes with this occupation happening right now. I really appreciate all the support that people far and wide are giving to Minnesota right now. And I do have to stress this is not the only place this has happened, and this is not the only place this is going to happen. We really all do just have to look out for each other right now. And I'm so grateful for everybody who is doing that, and we all just need to be doing that. So much love to everybody out there through this trying time, through the solidarity being expressed, and let's keep fighting together. We can and we will build a better world. Okay, so let's talk about Magic. I said that this week I'm going to be talking about maintaining Singleton in Cube. And Singleton, of course, refers to only having exactly one copy of any given card in an environment. So famously, the Commander format is a Singleton format. You can only play one of anything. And today my focus is really going to be on what I enjoy about Singleton. I do have a couple episodes coming up. I have two Tuberts that I maintain that I actually really like that break Singleton, but today I'm largely talking about why we refer to not using Singleton as breaking Singleton. On those episodes, I'll be talking about why I break Singleton, what is valuable about the multiple copies of cards in those cubes. But today I'm talking about what is good about only having one copy of a card, because really in cube design, you can do whatever you want, your cube, your rules. If there's cards you particularly like, yeah, absolutely, you can have multiple copies of them. There's not anything wrong with that, but I'm just sharing my perspective on what I really like about Singleton, and that's going to naturally shine light on why you might bring Singleton. Of course, you might not agree with what I like about it, you might not have the same values as I do, you might not enjoy the same aspects of the pursuit of Singleton that I do, and so if you don't share that in common, of course, feel free to break Singleton in your own designs, willy-nilly do whatever you want. But today I'm just going to talk about what I really like about Singleton, which I think will provide a really good setup and framing for those two cubes that I maintain that break Singleton, and why that's kind of a bigger deal for me, which will be coming out later in this month. So the big general note I have about why I love maintaining Singleton is simply the artistry of it. You can try to say that you have carefully engineered the perfect Magic environment. It is balanced. You have the cards that are going to line up in a way that give everybody the best chance to win every game. I do value the egalitarian aspect of cube design. I do try to balance my environments, but it is way more fun to do that when you can't use any of the same pieces, when you are pulling from the now 30 some thousand Magic cards that exist and just trying to find the ones that play the best together. I could make a really balanced environment if I only had a small number of cards across every color and multiple copies of all the cards. We could play something really balanced. But would it be very fun? Would the art of it be very expressive? Maybe. There's ways to do it for sure. But there is kind of a clear, visible artistry on display with Singleton. And if you ever worked on a Singleton cube, you have felt it when you are laying out your list and thinking, okay, well, I need a red 2, and you have multiple red 2s. If this was constructed, you have your one copy, you could go up to 4, whatever, do multiples easily, but really racking your brain for something that fits into the archetypes you're trying to support, or maybe something that has cross-archetype synergy, and not being able to reuse the same material more than once. I really enjoy the exploration there. And it is inherently more difficult. There's a challenge there with making sure you only use one copy of any individual card, and I enjoy that challenge. And a second order effect of that, I know that when I'm building cubes, when I'm building a Tubert, for example, and I'm trying to get up to 180 so I could fully facilitate a 4-player draft, it's usually the case that there are some cards that I consider fundamental to what I'm trying to design. There's archetypes I'm supporting, and so there's cards that naturally fit into those archetypes. And then I get to the point where there's some small number of cards in a given color or a given color pair, and I'm really racking my brain to actually get up to the threshold. I know that for a lot of players, definitely if you are designing a cube and it's just a cards you like kind of cube, then you're more likely in the space where you have to trim some cards. I mean, if I'm just curating a list of cards that I like, that is way too big to be just one cube for me. So usually I have some guardrails in place, some very specific principles for things that I'm trying to design, and that's where those guardrails kind of cause me to have a lot of specific stuff that I want, and then for it to be a little bit more difficult to kind of scour for the last couple of slots to round something out. And those are really good conversation starters. And then there's exploration in that, in playing the cube on those early drafts when you first get something together, where you know which of the cards, let's say you had, 18 green cards you really like, and then there's 5 that, well, I think that these play, but I'm not really sure. I know what I'm trying to support, and this is what I came up with abstractly, and then you play games. And they're good conversation starters because in your mind, you think that these are the ones that might not fit as well as some of the other cards, and you can solicit feedback. Maybe somebody else has some cards that they want to suggest, and then you can immediately point to something that you can ask how it played for them, or you'd at least have in your mind as the cards that are less desirable in your environment. And the other fun thing about that is that sometimes the cards that you chose just surprise you. You could have cards that were the last couple of cards that you slotted in just to get up to a playable environment, and they really overperform. Maybe they do something in the archetype you're trying to see it explicitly and just play better there than you expected. Maybe they give you a different direction to explore, a new archetype or just a smaller package that you want to facilitate because it plays well, because it's fun. And also, sometimes the cards that you really like just don't live up to your expectations. They're too strong, they're too weak, they cause players to do something that's not the exact kind of thing you're trying to get them to do, and are just played just more on rate when you're trying to find archetype driving things. And there's just a lot of surprise that happens there, and that exploration is really fun, either at the top or the bottom of the power band, whether it's the cards you expect or the ones that surprise you. There's just kind of a lot going on with Singleton, where if you just have, 4 copies of the same thing, they're probably going to play about how you expect them to play, and you can always pare down from there and explore from there. But the more cards you see in action, the more quickly and the more explorations you can do. And really important when it comes to maintaining Singleton is you're just seeing more combinations of different things. This is something that Mark Rosewater talks about on Drive to Work a lot, is combinatorics. Different cards play differently with other cards. And yes, the environment will be less consistent in terms of what it literally does when it comes to maintaining Singleton. You'll have more variance. But if you pay attention to things like mana curve, then you're going to have, the same number of 2-drops, whether they're all Tarmogoyfs or all Young Pyromancers, or you have a spread among those things. And you just get to see how they combine differently by having different cards involved. And different cards will lend themselves to more different archetypes. It is true that a card like Tarmogoyf can play in different kinds of graveyard decks, or just in decks trying to play regular games of Magic. Young Pyromancer could be a Spells Matter thing, could be a Sacrifice thing, could just be good for mono-red aggro. But you do really get to see how different elements combine if you diversify exactly what those cards are. Maybe you have Tarmogoyf next to Wild Mongrel, for example, a card that will lean you into more discard synergies, and also controlling Wild Mongrel plus Tarmogoyf just plays way differently than playing 2 Tarmogoyfs. If you have 2 Goyfs, you can make decisions at whatever speed to get card types from the graveyard. The Wild Mongrel both gives you access to discarding cards from your hand to change the size of the Tarmogoyf at instant speed, and it has to give your opponent pause, as both of your creatures can change their relative power and toughness in different ways from this one ability. So you just see different combinations of things on display there, and that can push you in different directions as a cube designer and certainly as a drafter to see these different cards while you're drafting. And to me, that diversity, it's really important for making an environment feel really unique. If you want to break Singleton, you can have some cards that you don't generally see if you want to get weird with it. Tarmogoyf, Young Pyromancer, they are pretty vanilla examples of cards that you can cube with. You can absolutely get much weirder with it than that if you're breaking Singleton, but you will just see more different things happening categorically if you do maintain Singleton, just because there's going to, by definition, be more different things going on. Your environment will generally be less prescriptive by definition. And that variance of different effects up and down the mana curve actually captures something that I really like about constructed Magic. I have mentioned that I like maintaining Singleton, and breaking Singleton to be more like constructed isn't really something that appeals to me. When I think about designing a cube to make it feel like constructed, having multiple copies of cards doesn't really come into play for me. And this comes from kind of a specific perspective of mine. I really like building my own decks when it comes to constructed Magic. I know that for as popular as the game is, and for the amount of time a lot of people are able to put into it, when it comes to playing a tournament, if you're playing Standard, Pioneer, Modern, whatever, most people are going to net deck. And when it comes to what your opponent is playing, very often you see the first land, you have a very good idea of what is in their deck. But when it comes to kitchen table Magic, certainly when it comes to Commander, but even when it comes to closed decklist standard format tournaments, and I think this is especially true now with 3-year standard as opposed to 2-year standard, there's just a ton of different cards that are playable. So your opponent, if you're at the top of your game and you expect your opponent is actively trying to win, is putting the work in, that means that they're going to have some different stuff, some stuff you've never seen before. For example, right now, the Badgermole Cub decks, the Rhythm of Nature decks or Nature's Rhythm, excuse me, decks are one of the most popular. It's like the most played deck coming into the Pro Tour this weekend. And you can really change what your deck does a lot just by having one copy of a creature you can tutor for. So you're racking your brain not just for the commonly played deck list, but where your opponent might deviate from what's commonly played and trying to figure out what's in their deck. This is something that is a fundamental skill for limited. You have to know all of the tricks in an environment. Does your opponent have a giant growth, a neck snap? You got to be thinking about what is possible, what they could have drafted, what you saw in the draft. But when it comes to constructed, this then applies to higher power level cards. Things like creatures, things that would be limited bombs. Your opponent is going to have higher access to that in a lot of cubes. A lot of people cube at a lower power level. I personally like kind of a higher power level, not necessarily power maxing, but for me it's fun to play with cards that are appealing and strong. And I want to talk about what I'm getting at here in the context of the original recipe Tubert real quick. Something that I have gone to some length to make sure that I maintain here is when it comes to any given color, any slot on the mana curve, I want cards that play differently, even if there's some textural similarity. So let's start with white one drops. I have Giver of Runes, Student of Warfare, and Thraben Inspector. If I just wanted strong cards, if I wanted to try to have the same kind of game and you value the same card when you see it in different packs. I could have Thraben Inspector and Novice Inspector, right? Really easy to put that in. It's inoffensive. Thraben Inspector is a good card. Novice Inspector is the same card. But I want the one drops to be texturally different. Some of these cards are going to play differently in different decks, right? Thraben Inspector is going to go in any white deck, and that'd be true if I had Novice Inspector. But when it comes to Giver of Runes, you're going to be less likely to value Giver of Runes if you're looking at Supreme Verdict, if you're looking at Dam. If you're playing a controlling deck, you're less into Giver of Runes. And then there's something in between there with Student of Warfare, when you have this creature that can stand alone and be a threat that threatens to win the game on its own. That plays better in a deck with Supreme Verdict. So you kind of have this spectrum of cards. These can all go in the same deck. If you're just a white aggressive deck, you can play all of these. But there's different considerations, and you choose how you value that while you're drafting, and also your opponent picks up on what is happening as you play your spells. If you have a Student of Warfare on turn 1 or a Thraben Inspector on turn 1 and no plays on turn 2, you're starting to have some clues that maybe you're more controlling, and that kind of unfolds as the story, as the game plays out. And then when you get up the curve more, you have, those sweepers or cards that come to mind. Is my opponent maybe going to have a Wrath of God effect? But then you also think, is my opponent going to play Gideon of Ally of Zendikar on 4? Or maybe we have Restoration Angel on 4. You have to think about how they're playing the game and what that means, and not just in terms of what combat trick do they have, but what is their general game plan. With Singleton, you allow more maneuverability in what a given deck is going to do. And then as a player, you get more agency in sussing out what your opponent is trying to accomplish. You get to change your play based around that. So Singleton makes the environment less prescriptive, and even when it comes to just the general strong cards your opponent plays, there's kind of a metagame. There's something to think about, something to explore in terms of reading your opponent's game actions, which there's more depth to that as you maintain Singleton, as there's a wider range of options for things that could happen, even within just one monocolored deck. And again, this is not to be disparaging of retail limited to say that one is better or worse. I just enjoy that aspect. It feels more like the kind of Magic that I like when I have to think about what my opponent's strongest cards, what their deck defining cards are. That feels like the exploratory part of Constructed, the self-expressive part of Constructed Magic and deck building that I really enjoy, which you compare to a set cube, which is something that I don't really spend a lot of time with. A lot of players really like this. Certainly if you're a fan of retail limited, it makes a lot of sense to play in the set cube kind of space. And one thing that you'll do in those spaces, you'll break Singleton. You want to have more representation of commons. But something that happens in that draft experience, I know that even when I'm playing retail limited, I open up a booster pack and there's two copies of the same card. It's kind of deflating and weird for me. And that's something that's been possible as long as I've been playing Magic. You have a foil copy of a card and a non-foil copy in the same pack. It's always felt weird to me if I'm presented with the option to pass the same card that I'm drafting. I don't really enjoy the signals involved with that. I like at least for the cards to be kind of different, definitely with the design that's as informed as something like the original recipe Tubert, where if I take one of the white one drops versus one of the others, I can move in a more controlling or aggressive direction and kind of send signals. If I take the Thraben Inspector, a past giver of runes, I could tell you, sure, you can be a white aggressive deck, but as more white cards don't come down the pipeline as I'm passing further on, then you identify you need to be a second color, and then I could be a white controlling deck, and those signals are more interesting to read. I think that is less fun and less interesting when you're talking about literally having the same card passed around. And that's my subjective preference. There's a lot of room for reasonable disagreement there. You don't even have to say why you like it the other way. This is a fine thing to disagree on. But then, as far as my position, I do just want to add to that a little bit. When you talk about a cube environment that only has one copy of a given card, you're talking about the copy. When I have the Restoration Angel, it's a lot different from me having a Restoration Angel as you line up some effect. If you want to attack into it or you have some kill spell and I could have Restoration Angel, it just feels way different if there's only one copy. And to kind of reinforce what I'm describing here and the mythos of having a single copy, there's a couple examples that I want to pull from. So the first actually comes from Commander. I want to talk about DJ Johnson's Gonti deck. If you haven't seen the Ristic Studies video on that deck, I highly recommend checking it out. It's an unsleeved deck with Gonti, Lord of Luxury, as the commander, and every card is heavily played. Of course, it's played unsleeved. And the card I really want to draw attention to is there's a Mana Crypt in that deck. And what DJ does is tracks coin flips won or lost as the Mana Crypt is controlled in games. So you look at this card, it's beat to hell from Shuffleware. It's the Mana Crypt in the Gonti deck, and it has the hash marks for coin flips, wins, and losses. And that just really isn't very cool if you're allowed to play multiple Mana Crypts, right? Like, it is the Mana Crypt. It is marked up. It's not just the Mana Crypt in this deck. Like, there's just no other Mana Crypt like it. It's the copy. There's not a second Mana Crypt in there. This is the Mana Crypt. And those hash marks are so cool. When you look at it, that you are seeing the history of every Mana Crypt flip ever made by this deck. You have the record there on display, and that would lose some of its appeal if there were multiples. The heavily played aspect, the unsleeved aspect, those are really what make the deck cool, but when it comes to the deck maintaining Singleton, this is the demonic tutor that DJ had to track down that was chewed up, and he gets to play in this unsleeved deck. This is the Mana Crypt that tells the story of every coin ever flipped by this deck. That stuff is really cool, and you really just distill down this mythos of things that happen in this deck. And you would lose some of that if you were able to break Singleton. And Commander largely is about maintaining Singleton to have the higher variance of games, but then there is this higher variance of stories as well, where every individual card is more able to express an individual card if it is the only copy of the card in the environment. Like, the Spell Pierce in my vintage cube is a Grand Prix stamped Spell Pierce from the first Grand Prix I ever day two'd. It was Zendikar sealed deck in Minneapolis. So a hometown Grand Prix, my first day two, it has this star stamp. Every time you Spell Pierce something in my vintage cube, that card has been traveling for over 10 years with me, like over 15 years now, Jesus. But that card has been traveling with me from that specific event, and every time that something is Spell Pierce in my vintage cube, it is that Spell Pierce, and that matters. That is really cool to me. And then I want to pull an example from a cube that breaks Singleton, but also does reinforce this in a very similar way, and that's Andy Mangold's 100 Ornithopters cube. The card is generally Singleton. If you somehow haven't heard of this one, definitely check it out. It's a really cool design. It is Singleton, except it has 100 copies of Ornithopter. Those are the only creatures, and by design, generally, a game has to be won with Ornithopters in the game. And what Andy has done is, before the cube was ever drafted, he numbered all the Ornithopters. The Ornithopters are Ornithopter 1 through 100. And as players' trophy with the cube, you get to name an Ornithopter and alter an Ornithopter every time that you win. So you get to see different sketches, people's creative expression on the individual Ornithopters, which are always numbered. And then also, when you win a game with a specific Ornithopter, you can put a hash mark to express that this Ornithopter was responsible for defeating a player. So every individual Ornithopter gets to tell a story there. It's not like, I've used this example in the podcast before. I was talking about, I believe it was regarding modular cubes, and how if you have a different copy of a card from a different environment, it's good to denote it in some way. If you're pulling from different eras, making sure that you have a copy of Opt, for example, that was printed in different eras. If you're looking at a pack and it has two Opts and they're the same art, there's nothing special about them, it's not that cool to have a pack with two Opts. But even in the 100 Ornithopter cube, if you have a pack with 8 Ornithopters, which can and does happen, you look at, all right, well, which one of these has won a draft before? What are the numbers? Are the numbers particularly cool? How many kills do each of these Ornithopters claim? So even though that cube breaks Singleton in a very extreme way, there's 100 copies of the same card. Each of them still expresses some individuality. There is still some uniqueness to every copy of the card. And that's just something that I think the cube would be a lot less cool if that wasn't a part of it. You definitely don't have to do it. There's a local copy of 100 Ornithopters where we don't do that kind of stuff. There's just a bunch of Ornithopters in there. But even having access to a copy of the cube and having been able to draft it, I still would be much more excited to draft Andy's copy of the cube, to play with all of those altered and named and hash marked Ornithopters. It's just way cooler than having a stack of a bunch of the same cards. It's a great design. It's a really fun cube one way or the other, but that personalized touch that really celebrates the individual cards, that's something that you get automatically almost by maintaining Singleton. And I really admire and I love the decision to make every Ornithopter special in a situation where really they could all just be the same. That's a really cool touch, and it does speak to what's cool about maintaining Singleton. Knowing something about a copy of a card just because you're holding it in your hand. 2 Ornithopters or 2 Ops, something to distinguish one versus the other. That is meaningful in terms of a sentimental experience. It's something that I find very cool, and something I really like this approach from Andy, and it's something that, in my mind, lines up really well with what is cool about maintaining Singleton generally. And then the last thing that I want to talk about, something that I really value, that I find enjoyable about maintaining Singleton, is what I call the chase. And there's 2 aspects of this. The first is the chase for those last couple of cards to get your cube to a place where you were happy with every card in the cube. I was talking earlier about how kind of at the end of my designs, I'll start with a lot of stuff that I like, and there'll be a few cards that I just kind of get in the list to get something that's playable. And so the first aspect of the chase is drafting with some number of cards that I don't necessarily find appealing, that I don't expect to have permanent homes in the environment, and then through drafting and playing, either learn that some fit better than I thought, also learning maybe there's some stuff that I thought fit well that doesn't, and then just picking people's brains, getting some insights from other players about cards to add. I really love being able to add a card that a friend suggested, and then I can credit them every time it shows up and somebody has a good time playing with it. Something that really lends itself to the communal aspect of Cube there. But just kind of having stuff that you can express that you don't like it even about your own design, or if somebody else has some reservation about something in your design, and just being able to take that feedback and change a card and You just turn a slot into something that somebody enjoys, which you have a lot of flexibility with if you are maintaining singleton. Which is not to say that you have to be especially rigid if you are breaking singleton, but I think that I hope it's coming across that it is really natural in maintaining singleton just because of the difficulty of it, because of the inherent artistry of maintaining singleton. You'll have those flexible slots, you will have something that you are chasing. You are always trying to move your design towards something that is kind of the ideal that you had in mind for this cube. So you have the chase for those last couple puzzle pieces to make sure that everything fits together. I really enjoy that. And then the other side of the chase, this is when there was a card that I really want to cube with, and I just don't have an environment for it. I think it would be really cool. And then when you find the cube that you can satisfyingly insert a card into without any special rules, just by having the right combination of single cards that play together in the right way, and then a card shows up there, a card that you really like and that you want to play with and you want other people to be excited to play with, that is so satisfying. That's one of my favorite things about Cube. You can always put a card in the cube that doesn't really fit, that people won't play if you just want them to look at it. That's not very satisfying for me. I enjoy the chase of finding the appropriate home, about making cards fun and appealing to play with. A couple examples of this. Death's Shadow in the Tempo Tubert. Just getting an environment where I can slot in one copy of Death Shadow, and there's some more cards that play in similar space now, but just having the right texture where every deck is kind of a creature deck, and you have fetches and shocks, and you can value cards like Thoughtseize and Snuff Out more highly, and manage your own life total, where you have an aspect of a constructed deck exploration. You really do need to be managing your life total when it comes to Death Shadow, but you just kind of touch on it and you can choose how much you want to engage with it in the draft. It's both one card and a ton of infrastructure that moves around it, which I just think is so cool. And finding a home for that is really satisfying. A card that I had a lot of fun playing with and constructed, while also allowing for a lot of different things to happen in the space. It's not something extreme like a house rule. It is a card in an environment, and you can choose to explore it. So you get to express yourself while I express myself. And that's really cool. Another great example of this that I adore in one of my designs is Tron Lands in the Eldrazi Tubert. I have one copy of Urza's Tower, Power Plant, and Mine in that cube, and that's the kind of thing where at a glance you would think, all right, this is really only powerful if I get all three Tron lands and I have to put them all into play. That doesn't sound that good, so why would you do that? Well, there's a couple things. One is that the card Planar Nexus, which has all non-basic land types, enables you to control the Nexus plus any Tron land, and then their multiple mana mode will just be active. Another thing is that I don't employ any house rules with the Eldrazi Tubert. It's a cube that has a lot of Eldrazi, of course, and then there's going to be colorless mana matter stuff, cards you can only cast with colorless mana. It is not uncommon if you have this kind of spell, if you want to support Eldrazi, if you want to support colorless in a cube, to give players high access to basic wastes. You could have just wastes in the land box. I don't do that here. So the Tron lands are appealing because you do want to get colorless sources. There is a moonshot with controlling all three Tron lands. And then the Planar Nexus also just increases the range of situations where a Tron land can be very powerful. So there's kind of a floor established by making you kind of work for colorless mana here. There's a ceiling established naturally by what the cards do. And then just by kind of waiting and getting that Planar Nexus, a new card was printed that changes the way that you value these cards. I don't have to give you multiples of the Tron lands. It's something where you'll get all three sometimes. I've tapped them. I've had them all in this cube and made 7 mana. I have first picked Tron lands in this cube and not regretted it because there is a very high ceiling and there is a need for colorless mana in a lot of decks, so they're just generally useful. So finding the situation where you have a card, Urza's Tower, is kind of fundamentally unappealing for a singleton environment, but finding an environment where it has a natural home, where there is a floor that makes it appealing to play with, and a ceiling that is realistic to chase, I love that. That is one of the most fun aspects of Cube for me. I always smile seeing the Tron lands in packs of the Eldrazi Tubert. And so sometimes when I refer to the chase of trying to make something work in Singleton, whether it is a card that I'm looking for a home for, whether it's a home that I'm looking for a card for, I am always looking out for new cards that can make old things that I like work. Planar Nexus is a relatively recent printing. I know for a lot of players, definitely a lot of people coming to Cube, given the current state of so much Universes Beyond and how many sets come out in a year, a lot of players find comfort in things like non-rotating formats and just exploring old cards. But even then, there was a chase to it. My pre-modern Two-Bird is something that went through a decent amount of iteration since I first put it together. Even now, I have my eye on picking up a Chaos Orb for that cube and just exploring stuff that I don't own, that I haven't really played with, and finding a home for it. And also, who could name every card from Legends off the top of their head? Who could name every card from Antiquities off the top of their head, right? Spending time looking through those old sets, I really like finding cards from Portal and Portal 3 Kingdoms. I have some sampling of that in pre-modern. So even just exploring these old cards, whether you're looking at the preview season file, seeing what's coming down the pipeline in the new sets, or you're digging through the closet or looking at Scryfall for old sets, for old treasures to put some shine on, the chase there, finding reasons to play with individual cards and finding ways to make them satisfying in Singleton, really pursuing the artistry there, to me, that is just so fun. That's why I still cube. That's why I have a bunch of different cubes. I think that it is much easier to break Singleton, just put whatever you want in with less consideration for how it plays, and that's totally fine. If you're having fun with it, that's what matters. Your cube, your rules. But the artistry, the chase, the expression as a cube designer, and the way this enables expression as players in Cube Draft is why I love Singleton so much. And for me, I do need a really good reason to break Singleton to explore something that plays with multiple copies. Andy Mangold's 100 Ornithopters, incredible, inspiring example of a reason to break Singleton. And come out later this month and we're taking a look at a couple of my designs that both break Singleton. One of them very much inspired by 100 Ornithopters, one of them kind of a desert cube that plays at least 3 copies of every card, with a lot of aesthetic focus on why I do that and in ways that I have found to make that appealing and fun for me, somebody who generally does value Singleton. So with all things Cube, there's no right or wrong way to do it. What's important is the fun that you're having. So I just wanted to put this out to express something that I find fun about Cube, ways that I enjoy exploring the space. And whether you agree or disagree, I think it's just important to articulate what we like about the game so we can better understand and share the game with each other. So that's going to do it for this week. As always, thank you so much, everybody, for listening and for whatever work you are doing to be a good citizen of this earth. Much love to you all, gamers, and I'll be back next week talking more Cube. Later, gamers.